Hi and welcome back. In today's video, we're going to be talking about fund availability and federal regulation CC. So let's get started. All right, so first off, what is fund availability? Fund availability describes when you have access to the money that you deposited. Surprise, surprise, it's not as instantaneous as people assume. So when you take money and put it into a bank, sometimes they may hold it for a couple of days, and that's what we're talking about today. So why do banks hold funds? The biggest reason is to ensure that the funds are valid. What do I mean by valid money? So this kind of varies on the type of deposit that you made. Cash deposits of enormously large amounts sometimes will have a wait period because they want to ensure that all the bills that were deposited are in fact real. When you deposit a check, there may be a wait period depending on the amounts, whether or not you have a history from that particular person who is paying you, to make sure that the person who is paying you has the funds in the account, and also to ensure that the check itself is legitimate. Now, you want to pay attention to this because if a check gets returned, you, the person who deposited the check, may be issued an additional fee. And on top of that, sometimes you may accidentally be overdrafted and then you'll have an additional fee. So that's why it's important to pay attention to when you deposit a check, and they will tell you that they're holding it. Why do banks often hold checks? Basically, anybody can write a check, and it's a matter of whether or not that account holder has the money in their bank account. Sometimes if it's a small amount, they will go through quicker, but if it's a large amount or a brand new company, they may do a hold. Another thing to note is that there are what's considered partial holds. So if it's a large amount, you'll have access to the first set amount of money, and then at a later date, the rest will be put in your funds as available. This will vary based off of your bank. So what does that have to do with Federal Regulation CC? Federal Regulation CC actually implements two laws. The first law is Expedited Fund Availability Act, and then the second law is Check Clearing for the 21st Century Act. So this regulation gives the guidelines for banks to follow as to how long they can hold funds, as well as provide guidelines for how they disclose this to their banking consumers. Now, you have to note that banks must disclose this to you in a written form by your account opening, but they also have to have this provided to you through either their website or their app, and be able to train their tellers to give you the information up front. How long can banks hold funds? Federal Regulation CC says for a reasonable amount of time, which in general is between 2 to 5 business days. Now, just because 2 to 5 is reasonable doesn't mean that there can't be additional days attached if there is an investigation going on, etc. There are stipulations and guidelines for having a longer hold. Another thing to pay attention is the bank's cutoff time for deposit, because this can actually vary dependent on how you're depositing the funds. When it comes to depositing at a bank physically, then it might be a little bit before closing time, or it might be at closing time. If you are doing a mobile check deposit, there may be a certain cutoff time there, and there also may be a different cutoff time if you were depositing a check or cash into, say, an ATM. What do I mean by cutoff time? Well, if you deposit the money before the cutoff time, that means that it gets processed that day. If you don't, then it means it gets processed the next business day. Let's talk about some of the scenarios in which a hold might be a little bit longer. New account deposits. Next day deposits when you're opening a new bank account generally apply to the first $5,000. And that's the first $5,000 in cash. That's the first $5,000 in an electronic fund transfer. And that could also be the first $5,000 in a check. Generally, then the remaining funds will be released by the 9th business day. Large deposits. Banks may have a large deposit set at $5,000 or more. This actually can vary based on the bank, and you can sometimes get one-off approvals if it is being done within the same bank, etc. So if you're trying to deposit a large amount of money, make sure and touch base with your bank in order to ensure that it will be accepted. And they'll also give you, again, the guidelines and timetable for you of like, yes, if you're going to deposit $250,000, then this amount of money is going to be available on this day. Then then this amount of money will be available the next day, so forth and so forth. Potentially uncollectible checks. When there is a potential for check fraud, if the check that you took a mobile picture of looks a little bit too blurry, sometimes it will be issued for an additional couple days hold just to confirm that everything is in fact hunky-dory. Another potential scenario is called an emergency deposit. So think about depositing your money, but then something national happens. That could be COVID shutting down things. It could be all of a sudden internet's not working, and that's how most banks work now with electronic fund transfers. And it could also just be like natural disasters for your local location. So let's say that there was an earthquake or a tornado and it affected the bank. So you might have to wait a little longer to get that amount credited to your account. Now understand, whenever there is a hold that might be a little bit longer than you're used to, that the bank must tell you. And so usually with a mobile check deposit, it will tell you check accepted or funds held under review, and then it'll tell you how much is allowed now and made available, and then when is the date that the rest will be available to you. Now, aside from fund availability for your particular bank, it actually can apply to other places that hold your money. So let's just really quickly talk about that. So usually if you have a third-party processor, let's say like PayPal, or you sell things on like Mercai, there may be a stipulation that the company that is accepting the funds for you on your behalf will hold it for additional days. PayPal's fund availability actually says that they can hold your funds for 21 days. That could be a long time, especially if you're dependent on it for income. You want to make sure that you are paying attention to these individual companies' fund availability policies so you know when to expect your money. In some cases, it's fairly quick, where they hold the funds until they get a confirmation from the buyer that they received the goods or their services and it was satisfactory, then they'll release the funds. This is also to help prevent chargeback, which can potentially cost you more money. Don't know what a chargeback is? Check out this video. If not, also it's kind of like a consumer protection, which makes sure that the buyer will have their funds back immediately should it not work out. I hope you found this video on fund availability helpful. If you have any questions, please leave a comment below. As always, happy to answer your questions. And please do me a favor, give this video a like, share it with a friend, subscribe if you haven't subscribed, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.